So we will start now with our questioning, the first of the Conservatives, and we'll begin with Mr. Shipley of 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to witnesses for being here today. Obviously, in the news lately has been a tremendous amount about the border situation and the 25% tariff that's being thrown around down the states to affect Canadians greatly. There's a lot of Canadians who are very nervous and upset about this. It could be coming forward, could affect a lot of businesses and a lot of people. And now there's even talk retaliation coming back from our side. So it's interesting that this has all happened, appears to have happened so quickly over the last couple of weeks with President-elect Trump's announcement of the issue of having fentanyl and illegal immigration as a problem at our border. Just a week or so ago, we had the minister here, and I asked that minister why it took comments from the President-elect Trump to start acting on this serious situation. And since that meeting, we've actually done some great research and found out that this has been an issue for quite some time. It's been very well known. I have here a meeting note from September 2023, September 2023. The meeting was between the Minister of Public Safety and the Ambassador of the United States, David Cohen, and this is an official document from Public Safety Canada. And this, basically in a nutshell, this talks about in September 2023, Minister LeBlanc met with the U.S. Ambassador David Cohen in a memo prepared for the minister ahead of this meeting with input provided by the CBSA. It stated that topics of interest and concern for the ambassador were fentanyl and illegal immigration at our shared border. My question is for the CBSA individuals here today. Is it fair to say that the Government of Canada and the Minister of Public Safety in particular have been aware of the United States' concerns on these files well in advance of the election of Donald Trump?
So I'm not going to speak for the minister. He's well able to do that himself. I will point out that since taking on this role, I have attended the Cross-Border Crime Forum with both this minister and his predecessor, where fentanyl and drug and firearm smuggling and human smuggling featured prominently in the agenda, and Canada brought as much substance to that meeting as our American colleagues. And out of that, the ministers and the attorneys general recognized the work that we were doing to establish information sharing agreements, told us to hurry up, and asked for feedback in how we were operating together. And we were quite able to give that feedback, and we were operating quite collaboratively together. So I have been in several meetings where these were on the agenda. And like I said, the minister was well briefed by myself and the commissioner in terms of the risks related to it. CBSA has received funding for firearms and drugs in the past few years, as well as addressing irregular migration and stolen vehicles. So the extent to which we have been given additional funding for technology, for detection tools, for
thank you for that. I'm sorry, I have very limited time. There's a second part to the question, so thank you. What we're really trying to get down to is the root here of when it just seems like the last 2 weeks. This is a big surprise. Everybody's panicking now, trying to resolve a situation. Further to that meeting that happened in September 2023, there was a meeting in May of 2024 that was quite boastfully posted on X, and I have the post here in my hand in the picture, where the post says, "Good to meet with Minister LeBlanc at the embassy today to discuss how the United States and Canada are working every day to deepen our law enforcement cooperation, secure our shared border, fight the scourge of fentanyl, and combat against the infiltration of transnational criminal organization." So that second meeting happened in May of 2024. So we know there's been 2 meetings about this. This can't be a surprise to anybody within the government. The U.S. ambassador shared this photo on X with his caption, talking about securing the border, fighting the scourge of fentanyl, and combating against the infiltration of criminal organizations. To reiterate, would it be fair to say the Government of Canada and the Minister of Public Safety have been aware of the United States' concerns about fentanyl and illegal immigration well in advance of November 2024?
I would say that they're Canadian concerns. about fentanyl and irregular migration and illegal migration. And they're concerns that are shared with the U.S., but they're not U.S. concerns. They're Canadian concerns, and they are the preoccupation of the CBSA every day. And so the minister is well versed in the activities that we take, interested in our seizures, the trends that we're seeing. So these are absolutely Canadian concerns, and that they're Canadian concerns that we're working on every day.
And they've been conceding Canadian concerns, obviously, for a while. Not sure how well they've been dealt with. My last question on this issue is, prior to President-elect Trump raising concerns about activity at our shared border, did the Department of Homeland Security or any other department approach the CBSA with concerns about the issues of fentanyl and illegal immigration?
We talk about it all the time. And just as by way of example, 2 times a year I meet with our Border 5 colleagues. That, of course, includes the U.S., Australia, New Zealand, and the U.K. And my U.S. counterpart and I consistently put fentanyl on that agenda. Fortunately for our other homologues, excuse the French term, it hasn't reached their shores to the extent that it has us. So we put it on the agenda. We discuss it. The Americans aren't pushing Canada. We are sharing information all the time, what we're seeing in terms of trends, precursors, transit, what's coming out of Mexico, what's coming out of China.
Thank you. I
Ms.
would definitely
O'Gorman.
say they're pushing us now.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions. Thank you, Ms. O'Gorman. And now to the Bloc québécois avec Ms. Michaud. Vous avez 6 minutes.
Ms. Michaud, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for coming here to this afternoon. And thank you for the work that you do. And I can say that there's very good cooperation between the RCMP, the CBSA, and in the Valleyfield post, and with Inspector Sirois, we know that there's a lot of cooperation. So I would like to thank you for the work that you do, and thank you on behalf of citizens. My question is with respect to an issue that's been on the agenda. I have an article from Radio Canada that talks about $1 billion is going to be given to border security with the United States and Canada, and that means this is a significant amount of money for the protection of our borders, and to just ease the Mr. President-elect Trump's feelings. The Minister of Public Safety, Dominic LeBlanc, has said that he is going to increase staff at the border with additional material. Some media outlets have talked about the use of helicopters and drones. So when will the details of this plan be released? Can you talk to us about this extra staff that's going to be assigned to the border, and clarify some of the comments that were made in Radio Canada articles about with respect to the safety patrols that are conducted at the border? Perhaps you could tell us whether the investments are going to enable us to purchase equipment and increase the staff on the ground. Thank you, Madam Chair. Initially, this $1 billion figure is a surprise to us. We submitted our request, but I'm not sure that this is going to come to fruition. But as far as the investment angle is concerned, Minister Blanc was very clear. He is going to purchase drones, helicopters. Our position is that we are going to use technology so that we can take a different type of action, if you like, different measures. Instead of using the human as a detector, if you like, we're going to rely on modern technology that we can purchase quickly, and that will have an impact. This is what we're suggesting from the east to the west coast. Also, as for the number of people on the safety patrols, I don't know how many people are going to be involved in that, but there have been. We're going to do a night surge where we're working hand in hand with the USBT when we do this type of work, and we do this on a daily basis as well too. So just in the past 2 days, we've intercepted 2 people who were trying to cross the border. So there's very good cooperation. But once again, when I go back to the question of equipment, we need to modernize our equipment. We have to really rely on technology. And speaking of this technology, I know that you're already working with some technology, but often it's a collaboration or cooperation between the human and the technology. For example, in the use of drone to detect certain vehicles that come in. They may be transporting immigrants or other people. I imagine you need evidence so that you can arrest the individuals involved. At least, perhaps you could tell me if this is the case when you're dealing with immigrants who arrive illegally. Perhaps they're going to try to do this quickly. So what's the relationship between technology and the human being? Do we have staff, for example, that use these helicopters or drones as a way of detecting people or families that are trying to cross the border illegally? Do we have rapid response teams that can go there to the border? I know. Do we need evidence? Do we need a special mandate? Or is it just doubt that's involved or suspicion that enables us to go ahead and use this technology? Do you have a way of arresting these people without necessarily, if you don't have anything clear evidence against them? With respect to the drones, this is used for areas where it's difficult to access. We're talking about ATVs that could be used. It also enables us to, our U.S. counterparts, if they see something, to inform us about it. The offense occurs when they cross the border. The RCMP is authorized to arrest people on reasonable grounds. I forget how for an offense that has been committed, but that's based on info according to the officer who intercepts them. One final thing, with respect to technology, we want to have a combination of technology and human beings. We obviously, if we use technology, we want to have a human being who is going to be able to step in. Thank you very much.
With Mr. McGregor for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you to all of you for joining our committee today. Commissioner, maybe I'll start with you. Would you agree with me that the growing use of synthetic drugs has presented a very real challenge to law enforcement in recent years?
I would say, Madam Chair, the growing use of synthetic drugs is a challenge, and I wouldn't mind. I see Mr. Motts and Mr. Shipley have a former background as police officer, and we've been fighting a war on crime the war on drugs for years, and many years. And I think the place we should start investing on a social aspect of deterring people using drugs.
But I want to focus on fentanyl in particular. Ballpark figure, for how many years now in Canada has fentanyl been identified as a drug of major concern, just because of its potency and how many overdose deaths it's been responsible for?
I wouldn't have. I'll have to ask Mathieu see if I wouldn't have an exact date as to when
but
it
it's
came
been a while
now. It's been a while.
Yeah, and its potency has obviously been the issue of concern. Would you agree with me that both Canada and the United States are dealing with crises in our communities from coast to coast? This is a very real problem that both our countries are facing.
I would say I would agree, but I will expand that internationally. There's several countries that are dealing with the same problem.
Yeah. I think it's important for our committee to not just go back a couple of years, but we have to put this in the context that this has been a problem that our communities have been dealing with for quite some time. I'd like to turn to the CBSA, maybe to you, Mr. McCrory, because of your responsibility for intelligence. Do you have any way you can provide this committee, with a comparison of, how many, roughly speaking, the comparison of like the drugs that are entering the United States from the Canada side versus the drugs that are entering the United States from the Mexico side. I mean, looking at those two borders objectively, which one does the United States have to worry about the most?
I don't think we have an existing study, for example, that does that comparison in terms of in the U.S. would be the best source of information for that data.
Like seizures, like what kind of seizure numbers do they have at the U.S.-Mexico border versus at the U.S.-Canada border?
I will say,
you know
in terms of fentanyl, Canada is not a significant source of fentanyl in the United States. The vast majority of the fentanyl that, as we understand it, in the United States is coming from Mexico.
That's good. I mean, that's a really important point to get across, and I think we have to remind Canadians of that. That the incoming president. I mean, I'll put this diplomatically, but sometimes fact checkers have had to have a very tough job with him. It's evidence in every single one of his interviews. You can point to stuff which are factually not correct, and so I think the challenge for us is separating the rhetoric from the reality. Now, all of you have talked about the excellent relationship that you have with your U.S. counterparts. I believe that to be true. But you've told us that we have this great working relationship, but if there is objectively areas for room for improvement, can maybe each one of your agencies tell us as policymakers in which areas should we be looking to provide you with the resources to be able to do your job, like for improvement?
So from a border perspective, it's challenging in that drugs are moving around the world all the time. And one thing we're grappling with our B5 partners at the World Customs Organization are small packages. And as we've seen, a handful of fentanyl pills through the mail can become many doses out on the street and lives lost. And so we are working very closely with our partners and recently talking to courier companies who themselves don't want to be shippers of lethal drugs, also don't want a pile of new reporting rules put on them. And so we all recognize that the balance is supply chains and stopping drugs from coming in small packages. So that's an area we're focusing on and really getting at it through intelligence and targeting. So at any one time, risk-based, looking at what's coming in, looking at what's going out, but also grappling with the post-COVID significant increase in small parcels that are transiting the world at any one time.
Madam Chair, I would add that I mentioned precursors, the regulations around precursors. I think there's something to be done there where we can examine from the import business as to what are the regulations for the precursors that are coming in and tighten it. We've seen on occasions where illegal precursors that we could not do anything with it would stay in a warehouse for a number of days before they would ship, so that would be a sign. But again, if they're legal, there's nothing much we can do. So is there any way that we can tighten the regulations and reverse the ownership on the person who's importing the material?
On precursors, quickly. I suppose, though, we can keep on running into the problem because now they're starting to import the precursors to the precursors, right? So, I mean, criminal organizations are always going to react to our latest tactics and evolve. So this is the challenge. You would agree, right? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both of you. And now we'll start over again with the Conservatives with Mr. Lloyd. 5 minutes, please go ahead.
Thank you for all being here. My first question is, we've long had an issue with contraband tobacco in this country. Wouldn't you agree? Like, is contraband tobacco a significant issue that CBSA and the RCMP deals with?
I would agree, still an issue. Yeah.
Do you see an overlap between like organized crime in the tobacco trade, contraband tobacco trade, and the fentanyl trade? Is there a strong connection there, or is there no connection at all?
I'm not aware of any connection. But what I will say is when organized crime are involved, if there's a way to move commodities or a substance or anything, they will use the routes that are already pre-established. So
what you're saying is you don't have evidence before you today to say that the groups that are doing it are the same, but that they're using the same supply chain networks to move their product over the borders.
That's a possibility.
So would you say that if we were to aggressively crack down on contraband tobacco, that we would also see benefits in terms of breaking up the supply chain for fentanyl and other drugs, smuggled guns, for example, human smuggling across the border? Do you think there's a potential?
It could have an immediate impact, but as someone mentioned earlier, organized crime will adjust based on legislation and how we operate.
And of course, I know funding's always an issue. We're in tight economic times, and does the Canadian government and provincial governments lose a significant amount of money on contraband tobacco every year?
I wouldn't have the exact numbers, but one can assume that they're losing money.
And if we were to crack down on that, perhaps we could get the revenues and the funding needed so that we could crack down on the fentanyl trade and the drug trade. Do you have any evidence of what organized crime is using the revenues, the profits they get from contraband tobacco? What are those profits being reinvested into?
It's the way of life. It's how they make the money. They get richer by bringing contraband or illicit substances or firearms or human smuggling, and they just reinvest.
So the revenues from the contraband tobacco trade are also leading to the drug trade, the firearms trade, the human trafficking trade. There's a connection there.
Well, as I said, if you look at organized crime, they're involved anywhere they can make money with somebody.
Okay. So there is a strong connection. We just recently finished up with our long auto study, and we've heard time and time again that stolen vehicles from Canada that are being exported abroad through our ports are being used to finance terrorist organizations around the world. They're being used to finance the purchase of smuggled firearms into our country. This is a very serious issue. Clearly, our ports are the weak point here. Does the CBSA have any recommendations for things that we can adopt to strengthen our ports so that we can not only, protect Canadians from the drug trade, but also give our American and other trading allies and partners assurances that Canada's taking the necessary action to protect them?
So, from the CBSA perspective, we work extremely collaboratively with our port authorities, and you did mention stolen vehicles, and the Port of Montreal in particular, where we've seen the highest volume, has been an excellent partner, and has been taking their own initiative on how they can further stop the contraband coming into their ports. The more containers we look at, the slower things go. So
they're coming through the Port of Vancouver, I would assume, given that seems logistically to make more sense. What are we doing to intercept those shipments coming into Canada? How can we strengthen our ports to block those?
So I don't want to speak on behalf of the ports. The work that we do in terms of inspecting and interdicting precursors and other contraband coming in through the ports is through a combination of intelligence, targeting information from allies, information that we have received through the many information sharing and collaborative arrangements we have with our policing partners.
Recommendations on how we can strengthen that today? Is there a plan? We've just been, the President-elect of the United States says he's going to put a 25% tariff on us. So do we have a plan to show that we're taking action on this, or are we currently just working on the plan?
So I'll defer to the minister's remarks yesterday about the plan that was consulted with the provinces, and that he has indicated, as has the Prime Minister, that they will talk to the Americans.
So there is a plan?
Your question on the ports, one issue with CBSA is ports are required to provide us space to do our examinations for imports. They're not required to provide us space for exports. That being said, we haven't run into ports that are resistant to providing us that space, but that's an area where there's a bit of a legislative gap that we would be interested in considering.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. O'Gorman. Thank you very much, Ms. Michaud, for 5 minutes. Oh, pardon me, 2 minutes. 2.5 minutes.
C'est décevant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have the same figures as those put forward by Ms. Vanderbilt. There was in a news clip for the L'Enquête of this 40,000 cellies that were intercepted at the U.S. border over the past 2 years. Only 20, very few pounds came from Canada. Most of it came from Mexico. I think it's 0.1 or 2% that goes from Canada to the U.S. and according to an article from the National Drug Threat Assessment that submits a report on drug trafficking, says that. So I understand. Perhaps you could confirm these figures. I didn't follow if Mr. Trump has made a specific statement with respect to Mexico, but it reminds me of the declarations that he made the first time that he came into office, when he talked about the southern border with Mexico. And all of a sudden, he seems to be aiming at Canada. And he even said that we could become the 51st state of the U.S. So I'd like to ask you, why do you think Mr. Trump is really going after Canada? I know that's a difficult question to answer because it's hard to know what he is thinking of when he says these things. But my question is, when you see a situation occur like that with its biggest ally, how do you deal with this at the CBSA? What can we do to prevent this type of unforeseeable conduct on the part of the U.S. administration? As I said, I don't want to repeat myself, but we work very closely with the U.S. agencies, whether it be the ATF or the U.S. BP, or our success. I don't know if everyone's aware of the success that we've had. Pardon me. I'm just going to say this in English.
Every day we are sharing information. Every intelligence report we create, we send to the U.S., our counterparts, as a matter of course. We find a new way that drugs are hidden and we share it with them. So operationally, I'm not concerned that there's a view of our agencies that we're not doing enough. Et sur la question de qu'est-ce qui est dans la tête des...
And as for what's in the heads of people, and I really don't know, as the government indicated, we can always do more. And these are issues that are being reviewed at the moment. And the minister said publicly that there's going to be more investment made so that we can do even more than what we're doing right now.
Thank you very much. We'll go to Mr. McGregor for 2.5 minutes.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Maybe to the CBSA. I'm focusing on northbound trafficking, so originating from the United States, coming into Canada, contraband. Based on the data that you have available at your agency from seizures made at ports, or in collaboration with the RCMP if it's seized further inland, can you just list off what are the imports of greatest concern from the United States coming into Canada?
So the first 3 quarters of this year, CBSA seized 750 firearms. Mm-hmm. So we do see a lot of weapons and firearms coming northbound. Mm-hmm. Currency, we see people bringing currency, more than 10,000, and again, without an explanation, leads us to suspect ill-gotten gains from travelers. We see cocaine coming up. Mm-hmm. But again, there was a major seizure of cocaine made by CBSA based on intelligence from the U.S. Mm-hmm. that was transiting from California to Europe. And so just to my earlier comment, drugs are going all over all the time, and tobacco, 500,000 kilograms of tobacco seized, and the point was made about the revenue and the links to organized crime. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add, but...
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And then maybe I'll turn to you, Commissioner. Just like with fentanyl, how has the RCMP seen the fentanyl trade evolve over the last decade? At the beginning, was it more like fentanyl was coming in, and have we now evolved to a situation where the precursors are coming in and there's more manufacturing happening within the Canadian border? Is that how the evolution has happened, roughly?
I would say there are, Madam Chair, there's more organized crime that are involved with fentanyl because it's so lucrative. It's very cheap to make, and it's the return on investment is very high, which is concerning.
Thank you very much, and we will now Mr. Motz for 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here, and thank you to both of your organization's frontline members who are boots on the ground to stand in the gap at our borders and across this country. So thank you for that. We know that through an order paper question that was submitted, that the Liberals lost track of 30,000 individuals scheduled for deportation, which is troubling in itself. How can something like this possibly occur? Specifically, 29,730 some who are on wanted, warrants for by immigration authorities, and they fail to appear. So how does this happen?
So on removals, indeed, you're right. The removals inventory that we have right now is significant. It's not static. So I will start by saying that. And last year we removed over 16,000 people, the most in a decade, and we're on track to do the same this year. Our officers are very focused on removals. So when somebody has gone through the immigration process and they are not granted status, sometimes they've been here for years. And so it will be time for them to be removed, but it will take a bit of time. The school year will finish and so on. And so just to say that our expectation is that people leave when they are not granted status, and indeed many do.
But keep in mind, ma'am, that in the next 2 years, 2.4 million visas are due to expire. So how do we as a country expect to have the people that should be leaving under those orders be leaving when we can't keep track of the ones we've got now at only 30,000?
Yes. So there's the people that will leave voluntarily. There's the people that CBSA needs to help leave, and I say that not euphemistically, buy their ticket, perhaps put them in an immigration detention center because we are concerned they will abscond. And then those that our investigators and Aaron staff are looking for all the time. And so to say that we are putting in a big effort, as we did this year, to increase by 59%. But as you say,
there's more to do. There's a lot more to do.
There's always more.
So let me move on to we've seen in the media and know that the Americans have seen a huge increase in the number of people coming from Canada into the United States illegally. Between 2002 and 2022 and 2024, it's estimated that increase was 82% to roughly around 19,000 people in that 2 year. And in fact, about a 680% increase from 2015 when this government took effect to now, Canadians, illegally crossing the border into the United States. Why? How would you recommend we reverse this or mitigate this trend?
So some of it was mitigated with the imposition of a partial visa on Mexico and recent decisions by IRCC and the minister to tighten visa requirements and to end a process that was providing a temporary public policy for temporary resident visas. So those have all had a material impact from what CBSA has seen,
Right.
And we continue abroad.
Okay, so I want to continue on with the Canadians or people from Canada illegally entering the United States, but of greater concern than that, and that is concerning in itself. There's nearly 1,200 people on various terror watch lists who have been stopped by U.S. authorities entering the United States from Canada, and by contrast, the same people on terror watch lists entering the United States from Mexico in that same time period of 3 years was, right around 200. So, it's concerning. Like, so why are U.S. Border Patrols able to, interdict these individuals, and we seem to have a problem? And I'm going to get to the question of how do these people get in Canada in the first place in a minute.
So I'll begin by saying The way in which the U.S. reports on their data is a subject of discussion. So a certain number of those people, when they say interdicted or encountered, are people going through a port of entry and turned back to Canada. And that happens going the other way all the time. So that's the system working. And, what they say they're on a terrorist watch list, so I don't have information in those specific databases. But I think it's important to understand.
But you have the access to those databases, do you not?
We do.
Yes.
And these are people that the Americans turn around.
Right. And so
so-
then my next question would be,
I'm
so we have,
so sorry, the time is up.
oh, I'll have to
Get
use the
back
next
to-
round.
Yes,
Stay
thank you.
tuned.
Thank you, Mr. Motz. We're going to go to Mr. Shipley for 5 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to return back to the Commissioner and ask some questions about fentanyl right now. Obviously, we're seeing, everybody has to agree that across Canada, fentanyl is a very serious situation, harming many, many people, affecting families. It's right across the country. Obviously, it's across the world, but we're here today to talk about Canada. Recently, the Canadian Department of Foreign Affairs has been quoted as saying that Canada is now a net exporter of fentanyl. I understand there's been some talk today about how much goes to the States, how much goes here, but overall, Commissioner, would you agree with the statement from the Department of Foreign Affairs that Canada right now is a net exporter of fentanyl?
So Canada is producing quantities such that it would be impossible for Canadian consumers to consume. There is an export. We are considered exporting some fentanyl. As was mentioned earlier, minute trace goes to the United States based on the intelligence that we have. But it is being exported at a greater cost than what the cartel is actually making it right now.
Thank you. And recently there was 11 kilograms of fentanyl originating from Canada was recently seized at the Australian border. That's, I assume, I'm not obviously an expert in the size of that, but I assume 11 kilograms is a lot of fentanyl. Is that a lot? Is that
It is a lot, and during my Five Eyes meetings, I do chat with my counterpart from Australia to see how we can work together. Not that we don't work together, but work a stronger partnership in addressing fentanyl.
Okay, so that's just one example. Obviously, we're exporting it here now from this country. Commissioner, could you also confirm that there are at least 350 organized crime groups operating in the domestic fentanyl market, and that these groups are importing precursor chemicals into Canada, mostly from China, for the illegal production of fentanyl?
I don't have the exact number of organized crime groups operating or importing precursors, but I could commit to look in our holdings and come back to you.
Yeah, the Chief Superintendent's nodding a little bit. I know you're...
I don't have the exact number. I was agreeing with the Commissioner, but we could get that figure from Criminal Intelligence Service Canada. We have that data in our holdings, yes.
Which would be great. And I think that's really good to have, because here at Public Safety, we're always talking about many of the issues, and some of those are about auto theft, which I know my colleague from Ms. Michaud has mentioned many times, and a lot of that can be being fueled from this too. So that's why that'd be good information to get if we could. So I would just like to talk about the United States. They've taken significant steps against the People's Republic of China to stop the illegal flow of fentanyl and its precursors into their country. They have sanctioned dozens of individuals and companies profiting from the illegal fentanyl trade, and both the U.S. and Mexico have bilateral working groups with China to consult on counter narcotics and precursors. As of October 2024, Canada has not made a request for a formal working group with China. Given that 82% of overdose deaths in 2023 involve fentanyl, and that China is the main source country for illegal fentanyl precursor imports into Canada, should we not be willing to take similar steps as our North American allies? Do you not think that would help curb some of the situations going on here?
I would say, Madam Chair, either we take similar steps or we join our American colleagues and the Mexican together, so a stronger force to address it.
Thank you for that. Ms. O'Gorman, since 2019, Beijing banned the production and sale of fentanyl. How many kilograms of precursor chemicals were seized by our border officers?
So, unfortunately, the way we classify precursors and other drugs, they're all kind of lumped together. I will ask Mr. McCrory, we have some data, and it's not exclusively precursors. It's a small amount of precursors and other drugs mixed in there.
Yes, thanks, Madam President. Yeah, in terms of how we track the data, unfortunately, we can't break out the precursors from other drugs. And so the first 3 quarters of this year, we've seized over 21,000 kilograms of other drugs, narcotics, and precursor chemicals.
Chair. 20 seconds. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Michaud, for 2.5 minutes.
Thanks, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We talk a lot about the government plan to deal with this 25% tariff threat, but this is a plan that goes both ways. And during the last election campaign, pledges were made. He said that this was an emergency plan and that he was going to use the American army to expel people who enter U.S. illegally. He also said in a press release that he would talk about this is going to be the biggest deportation that's ever taken place on American soil. More than 60,000 people had asked for asylum in Canada. Today, in the United States, there are about 11,000 people who have no status whatsoever, and there are hundreds of thousands who are going to have their visas expire in the months that lie ahead. He talked to do away with the policy on undocumented aliens. He talked about immigrations coming from other countries to force other countries to repatriate people who have been expelled, and that he would replace the system with another new system. And there are other elements that I won't go into all of that, but I do have the impression that we're going to see a huge number of people who are going to try to enter Canada, and we know that a plan is going to be released next week, but I would imagine that you're going to have to consult various organizations to find out what could you be recommending. And often, I don't want to give you the impression we think that nothing's been done up until now about this, but I would imagine that with these types of situations, other additional measures can be taken. You're going to be given this additional $1 billion. Could you, Ms. O'Gorman, can you talk about recommendations that you made to the minister?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. We consulted.
Precise advice, but certainly additional resources in all of our business lines would yield increased outcomes. Alors, c'est pas mal évident, mais plus de personnes pour...
That's obvious. More people can to look at imports, exports. People talked about the technology that we could use to intercept people or detect people. We can do more, and certainly the minister did consult us about these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also want to ask on that particular subject point, when the incoming president, Mr. Trump, he's referred to using the U.S. military to enforce measures regarding the deportation of people who've entered the U.S. irregularly. I guess in practical terms, what are the consequences for Canada if he follows through? Do you have some projections on what that would actually mean? Would our immigration detention centers be up to the task? I just want to know, if he is actually going to follow through, what does that mean for Canada? How many people do you perceive might actually come our way? Because the United States says they are not our problem anymore and they need to leave.
So the safe third country is in place, and as my colleague said, we implement it every day. And so every day people come to the ports of entry to seek asylum. We process them, and if they qualify for one of the few exemptions, then they come into the country, into the asylum system. So we are prepared for a surge, but recognize the safe third.
May I ask, do you have a figure attached to that surge? Like, did you, roughly speak, do you know how many that would result in coming
No,
back
because
to Canada?
it would mean knowing, one, the number of people who would want to come to Canada, two, those who would qualify for an exception. And so that's just a bit unknowable. The exceptions include a family member, if you're a minor, if you're a U.S. citizen.
Yeah, and like are the detention centers, the 3 that we have, are they up to the task? I mean, like, are you going to have to rely on provincial prisons for people that you believe are a flight risk? Like, we just want to know.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot your
These are
question.
human beings. We want to make sure that they are going to be treated with dignity, respect, and have all the resources afforded to them.
Yes,
Yeah.
and so just in every day, a very small number of people who seek asylum in Canada are subject to detention.
Okay.
13,000 who are subject to detention are subject to alternatives to detention, which is to say bracelets,
Yeah.
reporting. So the small number who are detained based on a decision by the Immigration and Refugee Board are held in our IHCs. We regret having lost access to provincial detention facilities so quickly before we could build the infrastructure, but we are retrofitting our infrastructure to be able to take on that task. So
Thank you
I
very
don't
much.
expect the level of detention would necessarily change from what it is today.
Thank you, Ms. O'Gorman. Mr. Lloyd for 5 minutes.
Thank you. How many, to the RCMP, how many people do you estimate are involved in the production and distribution of fentanyl in Canada? Do you have like a ballpark estimate? Is it 1,000 people? Is it 10,000 people?
I don't have a ballpark figure on it.
So you have no idea how many people could possibly be involved in the fentanyl trade in Canada?
There's a significant group, a significant number of organized crime group, but if you're asking me for a specific number, I can't give you a specific number.
How many organized crime groups are
That's you
involved?
guys?
Over 4,000 organized crime groups in Canada, as assessed by the Criminal Intelligence Service Canada.
4,000 individual organized crime groups, all with their own distinct leadership and membership?
That's correct.
That's stunning. Now, we heard during the auto theft study from Ontario Provincial Police that oftentimes when they're catching people in the act of stealing cars or as a result of their investigations, that it's often people that they've already been interacting with, people that they've caught previously. In fact, many of these people were out on bail. Are you finding in your fentanyl investigations, when you're cracking down on these labs and you're having these great busts that we like to see, and you're catching people, are these people that are known to law enforcement generally, or are they people that have had no interaction with law enforcement before?
Go ahead.
I'm happy to take it. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for the question. Yes, it's fair to say that organized crime individuals are not individuals that have been arrested only once. We deal with the same individuals and groups very often.
So you would say that in the majority of cases that the people that you're catching in these things are repeat offenders?
That's fair to say, yeah.
Now, in a previous parliament under this Liberal government, Bill C-5 reduced a number of mandatory minimum penalties, and some of these mandatory minimum penalties were related to drug trafficking and the import and export of drugs. And these Schedule I drugs include fentanyl. So we're seeing, as a result of legislation like this, that people who are involved in this deadly fentanyl trade are getting back out on the streets more quickly, and obviously you guys are catching them again in the act. It's clear that mandatory minimum penalties, by keeping these drug pushers in prison for longer, hopefully acts as a deterrent for them continuing that activity, but at least it takes them off the street. How quickly do you find like the time period between these criminals getting out on bail or getting out on the street that you're catching them? Is it like years, like 10 years later that they're getting caught, or are you finding it's more frequent?
So it'd be speculative on my part as to say when they get back in. They're released, most of the times they're released under strict conditions. Some obey the conditions, some don't obey the conditions. And to put a specific timeline as to when they get back involved in organized crime is hard to put a quantified number.
But it wouldn't be a huge amount of time. We could be talking in some cases days, some cases months, maybe in some cases years, but certainly there's a wide spectrum of cases.
I would agree that there's a wide spectrum, as you covered, from days to years to several years.
Anyways, yeah, because I agree. We could shut down all the labs we want, but if we're not shutting down the people that are setting up the labs, then we're not going to be very effective we need to shut down the people that are involved. What can we do to get these people behind bars so that they're not out there pushing these drugs that are killing members of our communities? What can we do better?
So I would answer. I think there's multiple avenues here. One is how do we stop the precursors or slow the precursors from coming in the country? I do think that we need a strong outreach program to inform the Canadian public of the harm of fentanyl. And the other one is sharing information that is ongoing with law enforcement.
It's killed. I don't want to correct you because I agree with you, but it has killed more people in Canada than died in the Second World War, than Canadians that died in the Second World War, this fentanyl opioid overdose crisis. So I think many Canadians know that this is a deadly epidemic that has killed people in my family. It's killed people in many families across Canada. It's devastating, and I hope that you will get the resources and get the legal backing to be able to continue doing your work and cracking down on these people, because we cannot allow this to continue. As we've seen with this study, it's now costing us our international reputation, and so I support you in the work you're doing, and I only hope that you get all the tools that you need to get that job done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. And I'll just follow up because I don't believe you answered this question, Commissioner, so just using my chair's prerogative. Would stiffer penalties for drug traffickers and importers be an effective tool to combat this issue?
I would say it's one tool to combat the issue, stiffer penalties for sure.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I will go to Mr. Motz for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to change gears from my last and if I line of questioning. If I got time, I'll come back to it. Recently, the Minister of Public Safety was here and indicated to this committee that he's working on a plan to strengthen our borders. And Commissioner, you had indicated as well that it was reported in the National Post that you had presented the government with a plan to bolster the country's border security. Can you kind of describe what that plan looks like from the RCMP perspective? And I also want to ask Ms. O'Gorman, for both of you, what developments have been made since the minister's meeting with us here a couple weeks ago on the plan, and what is it looking like, and how is it rolling out, and what does it look like moving forward?
So for us, what we've briefed the minister on is really to increase our capabilities when it comes to technology, evergreening technology that we have, increasing our resources, and this has already been said by the minister publicly, and having more ability when it comes to surveillance by means of drones or helicopters. There is an appetite also to, as what I said, when increase the resources, we have to be mindful that like any other organization, we have limited resources, but how can we benefit from maybe other organizations by working together and having additional people at the border?
Actually, that would be almost the same answer I would give, insofar as that we are working extremely closely on a day-to-day basis with the RCMP as we carry out our mandate at ports of entry, and the RCMP does it in between. And so the extent to which they benefit from technology, we know what new technology is out there and how that would help us increase the amount of seizures that we're able to.
Okay, fair enough. So if I'm hearing you correctly, there's not necessarily a specific plan other than we're going to capitalize on some evergreen technology that we already have. We're going to maybe put some more boots on the ground there. We're going to use some other technologies like drones or those sort of activities along the border. Is there a plan to develop bilateral agreements with the United States and partner in some of those border processes? I mean, I'm not seeing, the minister says we've got a plan, or we're going to develop a plan, and yet we're bolstering a plan we already have, or we're doing something even bolder than we're doing now?
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I would leave it to the minister to announce his plan, and as he said, he's consulted the provinces. But just I have to respond to your comment about agreements with the U.S. just because I don't want it to be understood that we don't have them.
Right.
We have them, information sharing, and we're increasing them and operationalizing them. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear that we do absolutely have agreements, multiple agreements with Customs and Border Protection, with the DEA, with the ATF, with HSI, sorry for the acronyms, but I expect you know
Right,
what they
yeah.
are. So those agreements are well in place.
So, I mean, as part of the plan, and I don't know whether the minister has, apparently he's had conversations with provinces. Was part of the plan to include or have provinces step up, like Alberta made the announcement this afternoon, putting resources, manpower, technology, and other things on the border, spending $30 million to augment the resources there along in Alberta. Other provinces, I understand, are looking at doing also similar things along the border. Is that part of the plan that the government is talking about? Can any of you speak to that?
I can't speak about the conversation that the minister has had with his counterparts in different provinces. What I can say is that public safety at the deputy minister's level has a weekly call. Aaron and I are on the call with the deputy ministers from across the country. And throughout the calls, there's a strong appetite to see how they can help. And the Premier of Alberta announcing that they are looking at mobilizing 51 officers. We welcome that. Obviously, as I said earlier in the committee, this is a shared responsibility, and we all want what's best for Canadians and ensure that there's a safe and secure border. So go ahead.
So, sorry, Commissioner, that's great, and I applaud the Premier of Alberta for moving that direction. Now, how do you plan with CBSA and the RCMP, who also patrol and are part of the border security there on a very vast border? I might say, because I have all the border crossings there that matter in Alberta. How do you intend to incorporate so that you're not working against each other? So you share intel, you communicate together, you are on operations
Thank
together.
you.
How do you
Just
plan
a
on
very
doing
brief
that?
answer, please.
Oh, sorry.
No different how we're doing it right now in the province of Quebec, where we're joined to the hip with Les Sautés Quebec, and we're collaborating together and we share the information. You might have joint teams, joint command teams to make sure that everybody knows what each other's doing, and that the intelligence is sharing at the fast pace in real time.
I would encourage you guys to make sure
Thank
that
you.
happens in all the provinces.
Thank you, Mr. Mott.
Sorry.
Thank you. 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you. Two quick questions. Ms. O'Gorman, first question pertains to the demands of border agents saying that able to help out at the border during repatriation of certain individuals to ensure that things are done properly. Could this type of thing be present in the minister's plan that he's just tabled, in your opinion, or to your knowledge? I'm going to thank you for your question. I find it interesting that the union is saying that except for an order in council that goes back to 81, if it didn't existed, we can repatriate tomorrow. But at the same time, we're missing thousands of officers. So you can't have both scenarios. So every day at the ports of entry, we carry out our mission, our mandate.
Who is carrying out its mandate. If the government provided CBSA with the resources and the mandate to do that, we would, but that's not my area of focus right now. My focus is the ports of entry, our people internationally, the marine ports, inland. We have 200 investigators, so that is my focus. Alors, juste pour être clair, je pense que c'est
So just to be clear, it's easy to say that's the only thing that prevents us from taking action, but now we are carrying out our mandate, at the ports of entry throughout the country and throughout the world. So I thank you for your question and an opportunity to clarify a comment that was a little bit simplistic as far as I'm concerned. And as respect to the last time you said that you were adjusting to meet with the U.S. policy, and your organization provided a breakdown of this, and Trump referred to these examples. We see that more than 2 cars per hour. So the impact is greater than we thought it was. Is it possible at this point to begin dialogue once again with the U.S.? And I see that before 8 o'clock this morning, there's fewer people that go through than after later on in the evening. Is everything written in stone, or can you still talk to them and perhaps adjust the way we do things? That was an average. So as an average, I don't want to minimize for those individuals who used the ports of entry during this period of time. There was an impact for these individuals, but in this case, there's a port of entry that's not very far, so I know that adjustments need to be made. And I know that there's a lot of negotiations underway.
I think in a previous exchange with Mr. Lloyd, you reported roughly the number of 4,000 organized criminal or organized crime groups in Canada. And I'm going to assume that of those 4,000, I mean, that's on a spectrum. They don't all have the same capacity, members, et cetera. So amongst that 4,000, I think certainly there are some that operate in many different countries, and they have very organized and sophisticated distribution networks and so on. I guess what I'm wondering, Commissioner, is, in terms of like the resources that the RCMP has just specifically for organized crime, in your opinion, like what is the most effective way to combat organized crime? I mean, is it economic starvation, continuously interrupting their source of income? Because I'm just worried that a lot of the people who are getting arrested may be quite far down the organizational ladder. I'm just wondering, what do you need more from us in terms of going after the people who are the leaders of these organizations?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I want to clarify something. And Matt mentioned earlier, the 4,000 number comes from CISC, who's a Criminal Intelligence Service Canada. And the definition of organized crime in the criminal code is a group of at least 3 individuals engaged in ongoing criminal activity for the purpose of making money. So I don't want to alarm everybody that where it's so the definition is very. So to your point, Mr. McGregor, there's different. I think strong collaborative partnerships and intelligence sharing is one. Making sure it's not only law enforcement, but I think we have to look at bringing a different perspective of who is better positioned to ensure that there's maximum impact to organized crime. Maybe it's Revenue Canada if you get into the books. Often the money laundering file does not start with the money laundering itself. It starts with the commodity, and then it leads you into money laundering. But definitely, if you cut off the source of income, that's where it's going to hurt the most.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so Mr. Motz with 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just one question. I want to go back quickly to the people on the terror watch list who, the U.S. has intercepted down there. What have we done here in this country to tighten our border security so these terrorists aren't admitted in the first place?
So the scenario you cited were people going to the U.S. and being
I'm talking about
back.
the ones that they're in Canada already.
Right.
And so what are we doing to make sure that those on terror watch lists aren't allowed to continue to enter Canada?
Okay, but the statistics of people that the U.S. encounters and turns back, they may be Canadian as well. So I wouldn't take that whole number and say they are all foreign nationals into the country. So
I would agree. I would agree with that
Okay.
assessment.
And so to your point, your question, which is for those who have come from abroad who are foreign nationals in Canada being turned away. So certainly our colleagues from Immigration and Refugees and Citizenship would be well placed, but they have tightened up their visa requirements. Mr. McCrory can talk maybe a bit about the security screening process, if you'll.
Okay, yeah.
So yes, so I like to think of it as layers of defense that start prior to the border, and that's where, for example, IRCC requires a visa, and a portion of those are referred to us for security clearing. Okay. I think we did 34,000 applications last year, and had a non-favorable recommendation about 800 of them. Our national targeting.
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you for a minute because we've heard some of these numbers before, and I know we all need to do. We all can agree we need to do a better job. But I just want to put a motion on notice before I pass the rest of my time to Mr. Lloyd. Chair, I'd like to put this motion on notice. Whereas break-and enters against small businesses in Toronto have risen 19% in the last year, and the Ottawa Police Service is warning of an alarming rise in residential break-and enters, the committee undertake a study on the issue of break-and enters and home invasions in Canada of not less than 3 meetings, and that the committee report these findings and recommendations to the House, and I would turn the remaining of my time over to Mr. Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Mutz. Mr. Lloyd, you have just under 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I also will be putting on notice of motion. Whereas new data shows that homicides in Canada have increased 27%, and the homicide rate has increased from 1.71 to 1.94 per 100,000 Canadians since 2015. The committee undertake a study on the causes of homicide in Canada of not less than 3 meetings, and that the committee report its findings and recommendations to the House. With my remaining time, we know that where are these transnational organized crime groups majority coming from? Like what countries are they tied to generally?
You have the organized crime group based on CISC's report, 2024 report. You have organized crime groups that work within the country, and you have a percentage of, and I don't have the exact number, but you have a number of groups that have international ties, if you wish. When I look at, when we were talking about fentanyl earlier, we know that the Mexican cartel has a strong presence and are involved in the making and distribution.
Thank you. Maybe this is a question best for the CBSA. Can someone tell us what percentage of import containers are scanned at our ports, and what percentage of import containers are scanned at land crossings, and what percentage of containers are scanned at rail crossings?
So I don't have the percentage, and we would typically not speak publicly about how we do our targeting and the numbers we scan. So it depends on our risk. It depends on the information that we've received. So generally,
we did have a representative from the union that said that there's a 0% chance that anything will be scanned at a rail crossing. Is that true?
Yeah, again, disappointing that they felt the need to put that information out there without any more context. So I'm going to ask Mr. McCrory to address that quite directly. Thank you for the question.
So all goods coming into Canada need to be reported to the CBSA, and as the President alluded to, we do a risk assessment on all those goods. We also have targeting on certain modes that allow us to target. What I would say is that in any mode, when we have suspicion, either based on the targeting, our intel, or our risk assessment, or based on the experience of well-trained border services officers, we will pull that.
Now, we know that the U.S. discloses their percentages. Is there a reason why they can disclose their percentages, but Canada does not?
As I've suggested, we get data on all material coming into the country. We use that data to perform the risk assessments, and we prefer not to talk about how many actually will undergo an examination, because we don't want to give away our methodologies.
Would it be a number that Canadians would consider high, or a number that Canadians would consider low?
I think Canadians should take solace in the fact that we do a risk assessment on everything coming into the country.
Thank you very much. And